The Lonely Alien Girl. In a faraway corner of the galaxy, there was a planet so cold and barren that no one ever dared to land there. It had no cities, no life, and no future. The wind howled through the empty streets, carrying with it a sense of death. This was the place where the alien girl found herself stranded. Her name was Zora. She was from a planet far more advanced than Earth, a world full of life, technology, and peace. But something went horribly wrong. Zara had been part of an important mission, one that was meant to save her people from a terrible enemy. But things didn't go as planned. Her ship had been struck by a powerful force, and before she knew it, Zara was ejected from her vessel and sent hurtling into this desolate world. When Zara first landed, she didn't know what to expect. She wasn't sure if anyone would come for her or if she would be left to die alone. Her body was injured from the crash, and she could barely move. Her heart raced as she scanned the horizon, hoping to see someone, a friend, a companion, or even another being. But there was nothing. Zara's people, the Zorans, were known for their advanced technology and powerful armies. They were a proud race, and Zara had always been proud of who she was. But none of that mattered now. She was on a strange, hostile world, with nothing but the harsh winds and the endless, empty landscape surrounding her. Her body was weak. She had been without food and water for days. The only thing she could rely on was her training, survival techniques taught to her by her people. But even that seemed to fail her here. The landscape was unlike anything she had ever seen. There were no signs of life, no plants, no animals, nothing to help her survive. It was as if the planet was alive in its own way, keeping everything away from her. Zara remembered the last moments before her ship was destroyed. Her crew had tried to save her, but it was too late. The crash was violent, and the impact had thrown her out of the ship's protective shield. Zara had heard the voices of her people over the comms, but it was only a few short words before the signal was lost. "We'll find you," they had said. But they didn't. Zara had been abandoned, left behind. As the days passed, Zora grew weaker. The pain in her body was almost unbearable. She could hardly stand or move, and the coldness of the planet seemed to seep into her very bones. It was as if the world was trying to crush her spirit. And yet, she couldn't give up. She refused to. But there was something else haunting her. It wasn't just the cold, the hunger, or the loneliness. It was the fear. Fear that she might never be rescued. Fear that she might never see her people again. Fear that she would die alone on a forgotten world. Zara had heard rumors about the humans. They were a race from a distant planet called Earth. Her people had told stories about them. Stories filled with warnings. The Zorans believed the humans were unpredictable, dangerous creatures. They were known to be fierce fighters, but also ruthless and unforgiving. Zara had been taught to stay away from them at all costs. But as her body grew weaker, she began to wonder if these humans could help her. On the other side of the planet, far from where Zara lay, a group of humans was making their way through the thick, rocky terrain. These humans were unlike anything Zara had imagined. They were not peaceful or kind. They were survivors, carnivorous, violent, and ruthless. They lived off the land and fought for everything they had. It was said that they would eat anything in their path to survive, and that made them feared by many. But Zara didn't care about any of that. She was desperate. If humans could help her, she would take the risk. She didn't have a choice. Her body was failing, and the planet was growing colder by the day. As she lay there, with her head resting on the cold ground, Zara heard something. A sound. It was faint, but it was there. She strained to listen, her heart racing. The sound grew louder. It was the sound of footsteps. Someone was coming. Her mind spun with confusion and fear. Who was it? Could it be the human she had heard about? Were they here to kill her, or was this the rescue she had been waiting for? She couldn't move, couldn't even lift her head. All she could do was wait and hope that whatever was coming would bring her the help she so desperately needed. The sound of footsteps grew closer. Zara's pulse quickened. She felt a strange mixture of fear and hope rise within her. Was this the end, or the beginning of something new? She didn't know. As the figure drew nearer, Zora's eyes struggled to focus. She could barely make out the shape, but it was big. Too big. The sound of breathing was heavy and harsh. Whoever it was, they were no friend of hers. Zora's last thought before darkness closed in around her was a simple question. Would they save her or leave her to die? This opening sets up Zora's journey, building tension and suspense as she faces her loneliness and the unknown fate awaiting her. The mystery of the humans adds to the intrigue, leaving the audience eager to know what will happen next. The cruel betrayal. Zora's mind raced in and out of consciousness as the cold winds howled around her. Her body ached, and each breath she took felt like it might be her last. The footsteps had stopped, and she was once again left in silence, unsure if she was dreaming or if help had finally arrived. But no one came. The sound of the footsteps faded, and soon she was left alone with nothing but the harsh environment and her fading hope. As Zora's strength waned, her thoughts began to drift back to the time before the crash. She remembered the mission, the excitement in her people's voices as they prepared to face the unknown enemy. Zora had been chosen for this mission because of her strength, her intelligence, and her deep connection to her people. She had never imagined she would end up in this situation, abandoned on a dead world, fighting for her life with no one to help her. The Zorans, her people, had always been proud. They believed in their strength, in their technology, and in the unity of their race. They were a species that valued power above all else. Zora had always been taught that no matter what happened, the Zorans would always look out for each other. But that was a lie. The mission had gone wrong from the start. Zora and her crew had been sent to a neighboring system, where an enemy force was rumored to be planning an attack. The Zorans had received reports of strange activity in the area, and it was believed that an invasion was imminent. Zora's ship was sent to scout the enemy's movements and gather information. But what they found was something far worse. The enemy was more powerful than anyone had anticipated. Zora's crew tried to fight back, but it was no use. The enemy had attacked with a force so overwhelming that Zora's ship didn't stand a chance. In the chaos, Zora had been thrown from the ship during the explosion, and the last thing she remembered was the desperate voices of her crew over the communications channel. "We'll find you," they had said. But their words were hollow, a lie. Zora had hoped that they would come for her. She had hoped that they would search the planet, looking for any sign of life, any trace of her presence. But instead, they had left her. Zora had waited for days, calling out for help, but there was no response. It became clear that she had been forgotten, left behind as the Zorans moved on, their mission more important than one single life. It wasn't until she had lost all hope that she realized the truth. The Zorans didn't care about her. To them, she was just another soldier, another tool to be used in their endless fight for survival. The Zorans had no place for weakness, and Zora was too weak to be of any value to them now. They had left her to die in the cold, dead world, with no regard for her life. She had been nothing more than a pawn in their game. The betrayal stung. Zora had given everything for her people. She had fought in countless battles, had sacrificed her time and energy for the good of the Zorans. She had always believed that they would take care of her in return. But now, in the cold, desolate wasteland, she understood that she had been wrong. As the days passed, Zora's resentment grew. She was no longer the hopeful, loyal soldier she once was. She had learned the harsh truth that the Zorans only cared about themselves, and anyone who couldn't keep up was cast aside. But even in her darkest moments, Zora couldn't let go of one last hope: the humans. She had heard stories about them. The humans were known for their unpredictability. Some said they were savage, violent creatures, while others claimed they were capable of great compassion. Zora didn't know what to believe, but in the absence of any other option, she clung to the idea that perhaps the humans were her only chance. Still, doubt lingered in her mind. She couldn't ignore the warnings she had received about the humans. Her people had always spoken of them with disdain, calling them barbaric and dangerous. But Zara wasn't in a position to be picky. She needed help, and if these humans were the only ones who might be able to save her, then she would have to trust them, at least for now. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp sound, a noise that cut through the stillness of the planet. Zara's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Were the humans here? Was this her chance? She strained her ears, hoping to hear more. Her vision blurred as she tried to focus on the sound, but it was too distant. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving closer. Maybe it was the humans, or maybe it was something far worse. But in that moment, Zara knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. Whether it was a friend or foe, someone was out there. Her body ached with exhaustion, and her mind swam with confusion and fear. But as the sound drew nearer, Zara's thoughts turned to the choice she would soon have to make. Would she risk trusting the humans, or would she continue to survive on her own, clinging to the hope that her people might come for her? She had no answers. She only had the cold, the wind, and the hope that someone, anyone, would come to her aid. The carnivorous humans. Zara had nearly given up. The cold, harsh winds of the barren planet seemed to sap every ounce of strength from her body. Her mind blurred with confusion and fatigue. She could no longer tell if the sounds she heard were real or just a product of her desperate imagination. But just as she was about to close her eyes and accept her fate, a noise broke through the fog of her thoughts. Real, undeniable, and growing louder with each passing second. Footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps. Zara's heart raced. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind was alert, instinctively tensing as she tried to figure out what was coming toward her. Was it the humans, or was it something else? Something even more terrifying than the emptiness of this planet. Through her blurry vision, Zara could make out shapes moving in the distance. At first, she couldn't make sense of what she saw. Large, dark figures that appeared to be walking in her direction. They were too far away to be sure, but their presence seemed undeniable. Her pulse quickened. She had heard the rumors about the humans. The Zorans spoke of them in whispers, whispers filled with fear and disgust. These carnivorous humans were known for their savage ways. They survived by hunting down and eating other species, their thirst for blood and flesh, making them notorious across the galaxy. It was said that no one could trust them. They were unpredictable, violent, and ruthless. But despite everything she had been taught, Zara felt a strange sense of hope stir within her. If these humans were the ones approaching, maybe they were her only chance. She wasn't sure what they would do, but after being abandoned by her own people, Zara was no longer afraid of taking risks. She had no choice. The fear of dying alone on this desolate world was far worse than any danger the humans might present. As the figures grew closer, Zara could make out more details. There were 4 of them. They moved with the precision of hunters, their eyes scanning the barren landscape as they approached. Each of them was armed, carrying strange weapons that seemed to glint in the faint light of the dying sun. They didn't look like anyone Zara had ever seen before. One of the figures, taller than the others, spoke in a low, gravelly voice. Zara couldn't understand the language, but there was something in the tone that made her heart race. It was a language she had never heard, rough and guttural, yet oddly commanding. She couldn't make out the words, but she could sense the authority in the way they moved and spoke. The leader, if that's what he was covered in dark clothing, his face hidden behind a mask. The others wore similar gear, their faces obscured. There was no sign of compassion or warmth in their movements. They were cold, calculating, and seemed to have a singular purpose. Zara felt a chill run down her spine. These humans were not the kind she had imagined. They were far more dangerous than she had expected. But then, something unexpected happened. The leader paused. His eyes locked onto Zara's, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Zara could feel his gaze pierce through her, his expression unreadable. The wind howled around them, but it was as if everything had fallen silent. The other humans continued to move, but the leader stayed still, watching her with an intensity that made Zora's stomach turn. She couldn't look away. There was something unnerving about the way he stared at her, almost as if he was measuring her worth. He stepped forward slowly, his heavy boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. The other humans didn't move, waiting for their leader's signal. Zora's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in her mouth. Her voice felt foreign to her now. She had been alone for so long that speaking to another living creature felt like a distant memory. What was she supposed to say to these strangers, these dangerous humans? The leader reached into his pack and pulled out a strange device. He pressed a button on the side, and a beam of light shot out, scanning her from head to toe. Zora's body tensed, instinctively bracing for whatever would come next. She had no idea what this device was, but it didn't look friendly. The light hovered over her for a moment before the leader nodded, his face still hidden beneath his mask. Without a word, he turned to the others, gesturing for them to move forward. One of the humans approached Zora with a strange instrument, a metal syringe, and gently pricked her skin. Zora winced, but the pain was brief. She had no idea what was happening, but she couldn't stop herself from feeling a wave of panic rise in her chest. The humans worked quickly, securing Zora in place, checking her vitals, and assessing her condition. Zora couldn't understand what they were doing, but she knew one thing for sure. They weren't here to kill her. They weren't here to leave her to die. They were here for something else, something she couldn't yet understand. Zora felt a strange, uneasy mixture of relief and fear. These humans, these carnivorous survivors, were not the monsters she had been warned about. At least not in the way she had imagined. They were cold and ruthless, but they weren't immediately hostile. She didn't know whether that made them more dangerous, or if it was the first sign of a possible rescue. Her body trembled with uncertainty as they continued their work, but something in her told her that this was not the end of her story. Whether the humans would help her, use her, or betray her like her own people had, Zora couldn't say. But one thing was clear. Her fate now rested in their hands. Would they see her as an ally or an enemy? Only time would tell. The shocking rescue. Zora's body was stiff and sore, but somehow she managed to stay awake through the strange rituals the humans carried out. The tall leader with the mask seemed to be in charge, though the others moved with a practiced efficiency. They worked silently, as if accustomed to saving, or perhaps capturing, those in need. The cold air pressed down on her, but the human's presence was oddly reassuring, despite the fear that still gripped her heart. After what felt like an eternity, the humans finally stopped. The leader took a step back and spoke to his team in that strange, guttural language, gesturing toward Zora as if discussing something important. Zora, who could barely understand anything, felt like an outsider in their world. She was a stranger to them, just as they were to her. One of the humans approached her, offering her a small pouch filled with liquid. Zora eyed it suspiciously. Was it food? Or something more dangerous? But hunger and thirst clawed at her, and her parched throat screamed for relief. She didn't trust them, not completely, but what choice did she have? With trembling hands, she took the pouch and drank the liquid. It was cool, almost soothing. It wasn't water, but something else, something that revived her senses in a way she hadn't expected. She felt a slight warmth spread through her body, and for the first time since she had crash-landed on this forsaken planet, Zora felt a flicker of hope. The leader noticed her reaction and nodded, speaking a few words in his harsh language. The other humans seemed to relax slightly, but there was no warmth in their eyes, only cold calculation. Zora didn't know if that was a good thing or a bad one, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Every part of her body screamed for sleep, but Zora knew she needed answers. Her mind raced as she watched the humans move about, setting up their equipment. They were efficient, well-trained. This wasn't the behavior of a group of bandits or savages. Zara had seen the signs of battle in the wreckage of her ship. These humans were survivors, like her. But they were different. They were not weak. They were cunning, resourceful, and relentless. Finally, the leader turned to face her once again. He studied her, his piercing eyes hidden beneath the dark mask, and then he stepped closer. There was something in his posture now that Zara hadn't seen before, something almost understanding. It was subtle, but it was there. For a brief moment, it felt like he wasn't just seeing her as a helpless alien, but as something more, something worthy of attention. "You're not from here," the leader spoke. His voice was rough, but it was the first time Zara had heard him speak directly to her. His words were strangely clear, and even though Zara didn't fully understand them, she recognized the tone. It was the tone of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Zara opened her mouth to speak, but her voice failed her. The words wouldn't come. She tried again, but the exhaustion had taken its toll. She struggled to keep her eyes open, feeling the weight of her body press her into the ground. The leader seemed to notice her difficulty, and he reached down, gently lifting her head to rest against his arm. Zara didn't flinch. There was no malice in his touch, only the strange feeling that she was no longer a mere victim of circumstance. She was someone to be cared for, or at least someone worth the trouble. The humans, too, seemed to take notice of the leader's actions. They went back to their tasks, though their eyes still held an air of suspicion. Zara's presence was not entirely accepted yet, and she could sense their uncertainty. Would they trust her? Or was she simply a tool, to be used and discarded when no longer needed? But in that moment, Zara didn't care. For the first time since the crash, she felt a sense of connection to something beyond herself. The humans, as terrifying and unpredictable as they were, had done something she never expected. They had saved her. They had pulled her from the brink of death, when all hope seemed lost. "You're lucky," the leader spoke again, his voice almost soft now. "Not many survive out here, but you're strong. We'll need that strength if you're going to make it." Zara blinked, trying to comprehend his words. The situation still felt surreal. She had been abandoned by her own people, her so-called allies, and now these carnivorous humans, known for their brutality, were giving her another chance. Why? What did they want from her? For a moment, Zara considered her options. She could try to run, to escape while she still had the chance, but she knew it was pointless. The humans were far more capable than she could ever hope to be in her current state. If they had wanted to harm her, they would have done so by now. But that didn't mean she could trust them. Zara still didn't know if their rescue was an act of kindness, or if it was part of some darker plan. The leader's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We'll need you," he said again, his words carrying more weight this time. "You'll help us. It's the only way you'll survive." Zara's heart pounded. She didn't know what he meant by help, but one thing was clear. She had a choice. She could try to fight and run, or she could cooperate and see where it took her. But the way the humans spoke, the way they moved, there was no turning back now. Whatever happened next would define her future. The leader stepped back, signaling to his crew to finish their work. Zara was left with her thoughts. For the first time, she felt an unfamiliar sense of clarity. She wasn't entirely sure why they had saved her, or what they wanted in return, but she had no choice. Her survival depended on her ability to work with them, or against them. As the humans moved about, preparing to leave, Zara made her decision. She would follow them. She would learn what they wanted, and she would do whatever it took to survive. The crash, the betrayal, the endless loneliness, all of it had led her to this moment. She was alive, against all odds, and she would fight to stay that way. The dark secrets of the humans. Zara had been with the humans for what felt like days, though it was hard to keep track of time on this desolate planet. Every day seemed like a blur, moving from one survival task to the next, struggling to adapt to their strange ways. They were ruthless, efficient, and completely unpredictable. Yet, somehow, Zara had come to rely on them. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about their presence that gave her the strength to push forward. The leader, who she had come to know as Captain Rook, had been surprisingly patient with her. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words were measured and deliberate. Zara could see in his eyes that he didn't trust her completely, but he also seemed to understand that she was not a threat. At least, not yet. The other humans, however, were less forgiving. They still viewed her with suspicion, watching her every move, as if waiting for her to betray them. Zara couldn't blame them. After all, they were all survivors in a hostile environment. Their camp was primitive but functional. It was hidden in a cave on the edge of the planet's largest desert, far from any trace of civilization. Zara had learned that the humans had been stranded here for months, possibly even years. Their ship had crashed long before Zara's, and they had managed to make a home out of the wreckage, building makeshift shelters and scavenging for supplies. The humans weren't just survivors. They were experts at surviving. They had adapted to this harsh world in ways that Zara couldn't even begin to understand. Captain Rook had told her little about their past, and Zara had learned not to ask. There was an unspoken rule among the humans. You didn't ask too many questions. It was clear that they had their own dark secrets, secrets they weren't willing to share. Zara had tried to learn more about their mission, about why they were on this planet, but every time she pushed, she was met with silence, or worse, a cold stare that told her to back off. One night, as they sat around a small fire, Zara couldn't help but feel a nagging curiosity. The humans were clearly not what she had been told they were. They weren't mindless savages. They were cunning, resourceful, and far more intelligent than their reputation suggested. There was something about their behavior, the way they moved in sync, the way they seemed to understand the dangers of this planet better than anyone else, that made Zara think they were hiding something far darker. Captain Rook had his back to her, watching the fire with a faraway look in his eyes. The others were silent, their faces hidden in the shadows. Zara decided it was time to take a risk. "Why are you really here?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You said you were stranded, but there's something more, isn't there?" Rook didn't turn around. For a long moment, there was no answer. The other humans continued to stare into the fire, as if pretending they hadn't heard. Zara held her breath, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "We're not just stranded," Rook said, his voice low and gravelly. "We were sent here, and not by choice." Zara felt her pulse quicken. Sent here? By whom? Rook turned slightly, his eyes catching the flicker of the firelight. "By the same people who abandoned you." The words hit Zara like a blow to the chest. The Zorans, her own people. She had suspected that something was wrong with the way they had treated her. But this was something far darker. The humans weren't just survivors. They were part of a bigger plan, one that involved her species. "Why?" Zara asked, barely able to keep her voice steady. "Why were you sent here? What's the purpose?" Rook's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Zara saw something flicker in his gaze, a flicker of pain, or perhaps regret. "Because we were expendable," he said, his voice filled with bitterness. "Just like you." Zara stared at him in disbelief. "Expendable? What do you mean?" "We were abandoned," Rook continued, his voice cold. "The Zorans had no use for us anymore, just like they have no use for you. They sent us here, to this hellhole, to die. And when we didn't die, they left us to rot. They never cared about us. They only cared about their war." Zara felt her heart sink as she processed Rook's words. Her people, her own kind, had abandoned these humans just as they had abandoned her. They had used them as pawns in their endless quest for power, and when they were no longer needed, they had been cast aside. Zara's anger grew, mingled with a deep sense of betrayal. The Zorans had no honor. They were nothing but ruthless conquerors, using others as tools for their own gain. But then something else struck Zara. These humans, they had survived. Against all odds, they had survived. They were still here, still fighting, still alive. Despite the Zorans' attempts to erase them, they had refused to die. Zora wasn't sure what to make of this revelation. The humans had been through hell, and yet they were still standing. They had their own pain, their own scars, and they had every reason to hate the Zorans. But instead of crumbling, they had become stronger. Zora felt a strange sense of respect for them. They were survivors, like her. "You don't have to keep fighting alone," she said quietly. "I can help you. If you want to take down the Zorans, I'll help. I know their weaknesses. I can tell you everything I know." Rook's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Zora wasn't sure what he was thinking. Then he nodded. It was a subtle gesture, but it was enough. Zora knew that this was a turning point. The humans had their own reasons for fighting, and now they had a reason to trust her. But Zora had her own reasons too. She had nothing left but revenge. The Zorans had betrayed her, abandoned her, and used her as a tool. She would make them pay. And maybe, just maybe, the humans would be the key to her survival and to taking down the Zorans once and for all. A dangerous alliance. The air in the cave was thick with the weight of unspoken words. Zora could feel the tension in the space, the eyes of the humans on her, weighing her every move. They had been through so much already, but this revelation, this dark truth about the Zorans, changed everything. The humans weren't just survivors. They were the key to taking down the ones who had abandoned her. But could she really trust them? Could she trust anyone? Captain Rook's words echoed in her mind. Expendable. The Zorans had thrown away their own people, using them as mere tools, and when they were no longer useful, they were discarded. Zora had felt that herself. The crushing loneliness, the betrayal, the feeling of being nothing more than a pawn in a war that she never asked to be part of. And now, here she was, sitting in a cave with the very people who had been thrown away, just like her. Zora glanced at the humans. They were sitting in silence, their faces masked by shadows. Each one of them carried their own scars, physical and emotional. And it was clear that they had fought hard to survive. They were not the mindless killers she had once imagined. They were warriors, hardened by the cruelty of their own circumstances. But could she really join forces with them? Did she even have a choice? "What happens now?" Zora finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but her mind was racing. She didn't want to be in this cave, hiding from the world, but she didn't have the strength to face the Zorans alone. "What's the next step?" Rook looked at her, his dark eyes narrowing beneath his mask. "Now we make them regret abandoning us." Zora felt a chill run down her spine. There was no hesitation in his voice, no second guessing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about revenge, about making the Zorans pay for what they had done to them. And Zora couldn't deny it. She had the same fire burning inside her. She wanted revenge, too. She wanted them to feel the same pain they had caused her. "We've been planning for a long time," Rook continued. "We've been gathering information, learning everything we can about the Zorans' operations. But we can't do this alone. We need you." Zora nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come. She had been trained to fight, to survive, to be strong. The Zorans had underestimated her, but now she had a chance to turn the tables. The humans had their own strengths, and together they might just be able to take down the empire that had abandoned them both. "But why me?" Zora asked, still not fully understanding. "I'm just one alien girl. What could I possibly do that you can't?" Rook's gaze softened, and for the first time, Zora saw something like respect in his eyes. "You know their weaknesses. You know their systems, their strategies. You've seen how they operate from the inside. You can be the one to break through their defenses. You're not just some alien girl, Zora. You're a survivor. You've already proven that." Zora's heart fluttered with a mixture of hope and doubt. She had never seen herself as a fighter, not in the way these humans were. But she had a fire inside her, and now she could feel it rising once again. The Zorans had taken everything from her. Her family, her home, her freedom. They had left her to die. She would make them pay. "I'm in," Zora said, her voice firm now. "I'll help you. We'll take them down together." Rook nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good, but we need to be careful. The Zorans are everywhere. They have eyes and ears in places you wouldn't expect. We can't afford to make any mistakes." The plan was simple, but dangerous. First, Zora would help them gather intel. She knew more about the Zorans' operations than anyone else here. She would infiltrate their communications, learn their weaknesses, and find a way to bring them down from the inside. The humans would provide support, helping her move in and out of Zoran-controlled territories and providing backup when necessary. But the more Zora thought about it, the more she realized just how dangerous this mission would be. The Zorans had resources, armies, and technology beyond anything she could imagine. They had left her for dead once, and she didn't think they would make the same mistake twice. They would be watching. And if she was caught, there would be no mercy. "Do you trust me?" Zora asked Rook, her voice soft, but filled with an urgency she couldn't hide. Rook stared at her for a long moment before answering. "I trust you to do what's necessary, but that doesn't mean I trust you completely." He paused, as if choosing his next words carefully. "I don't trust anyone fully. Not after everything we've been through." Zora's heart sank, but she understood. The humans had been betrayed just as she had. Trust didn't come easily to them, and she couldn't expect it to come easily to her either. But this was bigger than trust. This was about survival, about revenge, about making the Zorans pay for what they had done. "We'll earn each other's trust," Zora said, her voice steady. "One step at a time." Rook didn't answer immediately, but the slight nod he gave her was enough. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a promise. Zora knew that the road ahead would be treacherous. The humans weren't the only ones who had scars. She had her own wounds to heal, and the road to vengeance would be long and hard. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had a purpose now, something she hadn't felt in a long time. And with the humans by her side, she felt a new sense of hope rising within her. But Zora knew this was only the beginning. The Zorans would fight back. They would stop at nothing to preserve their control. The humans were outnumbered, but they weren't without their strengths. They had cunning, strategy, and the will to survive. And now, they had Zora. She wasn't just an abandoned alien girl anymore. She was part of something bigger. Together, they would fight back. Together, they would take down the empire that had left them to die. The first strike. The days following Zora's decision to join forces with the humans felt like a whirlwind. The air around the camp had shifted. What was once filled with cautious tension now simmered with a new energy. Captain Rook had laid out a plan, a dangerous but necessary first step toward taking down the Zorans. They would strike at one of the Zorans' smaller outposts, one that housed vital supplies and communications equipment. It wasn't the Zorans' main base, but it was a place they would never expect an attack. The element of surprise was on their side. Zora's role was clear. She would infiltrate the base, using her knowledge of Zoran technology and operations to bypass security measures and gather critical information. The humans would provide backup from the outside, ensuring she had an escape route if things went wrong. It was a simple plan, but Zora knew better than to underestimate the Zorans. The stakes were higher than ever. If they failed here, they would be vulnerable. The night before the mission, Zora lay awake on the cold, hard ground in the cave, staring at the distant stars. The humans were preparing their equipment, making final adjustments, but her mind kept drifting back to the Zorans. What if they were waiting for her? What if they knew she would come? She couldn't shake the feeling that they were always one step ahead. The inside of the base was eerily quiet. Zora could hear the hum of machines, the low murmur of voices from deeper within. She moved quickly, staying low to the ground, her eyes constantly darting around for any sign of a threat. The humans had provided her with a map of the base's layout, but things were always subject to change. She couldn't afford to be careless. As they moved deeper into the heart of the outpost, Zara's senses were on high alert. Every sound, every shadow, felt like a potential danger. She knew the Zorans wouldn't make this easy. They never did. Finally, they reached the communications room, a small, secure facility at the center of the base. Zara's heart raced. If she could get in there, she could extract the data they needed. But the room was guarded, and there were no windows. It was a tight space, perfect for an ambush. "We'll need to take them out silently," Zara whispered to Rook. "I'll hack the door. You take the guards." Rook didn't respond, but he gave a small hand signal to the rest of the humans. They moved into position, their footsteps muffled by the heavy air. Zara approached the door's security panel, her mind racing. She needed to move fast. The longer they stayed in the base, the greater the risk of discovery. She connected her device again, working quickly to override the lock. Sweat dripped down her neck as the seconds ticked by, but finally the door clicked open. Rook and the others moved in, taking out the guards with swift precision. Zara stepped inside, her heart pounding as she quickly accessed the terminal. The data they needed was just a few keystrokes away. But then, a sound, a distant rumble, echoed through the walls. Zara froze. The Zorans had detected something. The base was on high alert. "We need to move now," Rook said, his voice urgent. "Grab the data and get out." Zara quickly transferred the files to her device, her mind working overtime. They had to leave before the Zorans sent reinforcements. As she turned to leave, a loud alarm blared. The countdown had begun. "Go," Rook shouted. The humans moved as one, exiting the room and retreating through the maze of corridors. Zara's heart raced as the sound of Zoran boots pounding the metal floors grew louder. They were being pursued. The mission had been a success, but the fight wasn't over yet. The Zorans were coming, and now they would know that the humans and Zara were a threat. There was no turning back.